Hey, what's going on everybody? It's Dom from Lensprotogo and Lens Rentals. Welcome back to the channel. So, if you couldn't tell already, we got a Fuji video coming at you today about this really neat and super fast 50mm f1 for Fuji X mount. But I just figured that I'd quickly mention that if you're interested in Fuji content, you're going to want to keep an eye out on the channel over the next couple of weeks for a video we've got coming down the pipe. One that I actually can't talk about yet, so pretty exciting stuff there. Anyways, this video is about this lens, this Fuji XF 50mm f1.0 RWR, a very fast prime lens for the Fuji X mount system. Now to me, when I think of Fuji glass, I'm typically thinking small and compact lenses that are generally built really well, not to mention having a lovely optical quality. I found that most Fuji XF primes are contrasty and sharp lenses, yet have a pretty pleasing focus roll-off and offer a decent experience focusing in either autofocus or manual focus. And this Fuji 50mm f1 RWR is pretty much all of those things except for one: small and compact. Especially for a Fuji X lens, this 50mm is way larger than some of its siblings in the lineup of Fuji primes, like this 56mm or this trusty 35. The larger size is of course because of those larger optics in there, allowing for that f1 aperture, and in comparison, the lens's size is actually pretty average on a full frame system. It's pretty comparable to like an 85 or 50 f1.4 from other manufacturers. And rightfully so, because this 50mm crop factor lens is just about a 76mm f1.4 full frame equivalent. And in a second, we're going to see a couple of shots taken side by side with this lens and two full frame 85s at f1.4 to see the difference there. But for now, let's do a quick physical overview of this lens. It's roughly 4 inches long, 3.5 inches wide at the widest part of the barrel here, and that's 87mm, but it's got a 77mm filter thread. It's also just under 2 pounds with that lens hood on, so again, a bit larger and heavier than other XF primes. However, one edge this lens has on some of those other Fuji primes is a weather sealing gasket at the lens mount, and a pretty bulky one at that. As for the build and design, it's a really straightforward and minimal Fuji prime. It kind of tapers out from the lens mount in 2 stages until it gets to the barrel where you get that clicked aperture ring and large focus grip. Then it stages down a little bit at the end of the lens for the hood mount and the front filter. There are no switches or buttons on this lens whatsoever. It doesn't have stabilization, so no switch there. You can't declick the aperture ring, so no switch there. And all AF and MF stuff is done on Fuji bodies, so no switch there either. The all-metal build of this 50 f1 feels great in the hand. It feels really nice and robust, although you might find that the metal focus grip on the barrel is much less tacky than a rubber grip. And also, kind of a small thing, but there's not a lot of space under there to press the button once the lens is attached to the camera to release the lens from the lock. I shot this lens on an X-T4 with this grip extension on, and I gotta say that with that grip extension, it made shooting on this lens like 10 times more comfortable than without the grip extension. Without that extended part of the body there, the weight of this lens just really kind of threw off the balance and it was much less comfortable to shoot. So really glad I had that resource there. Anyways, moving on to the inside of this lens. First off, maximum aperture of f1. And that's pretty exciting because generally fast things are exciting. Race cars, jungle cats, and now this Fuji lens. The lens has 12 elements in 9 groups, and those are driven by electronic autofocus motors in and out of autofocus. So in manual focus, it's focused by wire. The diaphragm is constructed of 9 aperture blades, which smooths out that bokeh and out of focus area very sufficiently. We'll see examples of that in a second. The minimum close focus distance on this lens is only 70 centimeters, or about 2 feet and change. And I personally would like it if it was a bit closer. I always find myself shooting lenses at their close focus point, although this probably won't be a big issue for most portrait shoots. All right, quick test on the chart here, and at f1, I'm pretty impressed. It's pretty sharp in the center, and that sharpness does not fall off a whole lot towards the corners. And also, other optical flaws aren't very present here either. No chrome ab visible on this chart image whatsoever. And the ghosting is there in the very corners, but really, really minimally. And just stopping down a hair to f1.4 f2 and 2.8, you can see how that cleans up that ghosting quite a bit, and it also brings out more sharpness and contrast. On our lens align chart, the lens did display some pretty gnarly longitudinal chromab at f1, and this really only cleans up once you get to f2, 8, and beyond. Okay, as for autofocus, maybe a little bit of an asterisk on this topic because honestly, in my testing, this 50mm f1 performed pretty poorly in photo and video. I was mostly taking continuous autofocus photo with this lens, but I couldn't really tell if that was a flaw of the lens or a shortcoming of the X-T4 or some combination of the two. Whatever it was, it did not like to track moving subjects at all. And even totally still unmoving human subjects, it just straight up would not grab face or eye focus. Or it just wouldn't grab focus on anything at all. I think it behaves a little bit better once your subject might be past like 6 feet or so, but it definitely starts to get lost closer to its close focus distance, which is kind of an important range. So I think in a lot of ways, this lens kind of aligns with some of the other Fuji lines available out there, but definitely in some ways it doesn't, like this really chunky and bulky size. And also that f1 aperture, and that's a pretty big thing. So let's chat about that for a little bit. I love Fuji cameras for shooting photo. They are really just so much fun. But of course, one of the main criticisms of this Fuji X mount system is that crop sensor APS-C format, which just in comparison is a lot less apt for light gathering than a full frame sensor, just given that size difference. So the f1 aperture of this lens is going to attempt to give it that edge. And just out of curiosity, I wanted to shoot this lens up against an 85mm full frame prime at f1.4, which is close enough. It'll basically be 85 versus 75mm at f1.4. So take what you want away from this test, but what I was concerned with in this side-by-side was the difference in how these lenses treated the bokeh and also how the focus rolled off in these images. So from these two images, the left was taken on the Fuji 50 f1 and the right was taken on the 85mm RF f1.2 at f1.4, which is an insanely sharp lens, but what I'm looking at here is how the Canon hugely softened those bokehs here, but the Fujis are much more in focus, and this also makes their odd, almost bell shape to be even more noticeable. Here is the 50 f1 next to a Sigma 85 DG-DN image taken on the Lumix S5. And what jumps out to me is that the Sigma's focus falls off a bit steeper than the X-T4's, but at the very top here, these bokehs, they also come out pretty sharp, but they maintain their shape much better as they get even all the way up to the top here, unlike the Fuji, which again are odd and bell-shaped. So I think the moral of the story for this lens is that it has that fast f1 aperture if you need it, but you've got to understand that wide open, the lens gets a bit more optically flawed, which is as expected. It will be a hair less sharp, a little less contrasty, and although the bokehs will blow up in size compared to like f2 or so, they can get to be a bit wonky looking, which at a point can be more distracting than complementary to an image. All right, so my final thoughts on this Fuji XF 50mm f1.0 RWR. Well, I think that if you're a Fuji shooter and you're liking your images, but maybe you want to take a leap on a piece of gear that's going to help you get that full frame look that's not an entirely new camera body. You want images with a larger bokeh, maybe more separation from foreground to background, especially in tight spaces, or maybe you just specifically really want a much faster Fuji prime that's going to help you in low light scenarios. I think this 50mm f1 RWR is going to be a pretty decent solution if that is you, although at $1,500, a pretty pricey solution. And with that, that's pretty much going to wrap up this video talking about this awesome Fuji portrait lens. And like I said, there's another piece of awesome Fuji content in the works right now, so keep an eye out on the channel in the weeks to come for that. But as for this video, as always, if you have any questions about this lens or any of the gear you saw in this video, drop a comment in the comment section below and we'll start a discussion. Also, if you happen to like this video, hit it with that little thumbs up button down below to let me know you liked it. If you're not subscribed, go ahead and do that. And if you are subscribed, you can actually hit that little bell button down there too to be notified whenever we post new content, which is every week. So take care, and we'll see you in the next one.